Greetings, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Now, you're not seeing my ugly mug for a change because I'm going to try and get closer and actually have a peep into that garden. But anyway, that's where Whistler lived. James McNeil Whistler, the celebrated American artist who spent much of his adult life in London. Here we are on Chain Walk in Chelsea, this very she area of London. He lived just beside Mrs. Gaskell, although his time in London overlapped with her lifetime. Anyway, so Whistler, he was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, to a family who'd been in the United States for several generations. His mother came from one of the southern states, and in his adolescence, the issue of slavery was a controversial one. Obviously, he was a young man when the American Civil War broke out, but he took no part in that. I think he might have been over here by that stage. So his father was a railway engineer, and that was the occupation to have because the railways were expanding at a frightening pace, and there's plenty of money to be made. So they're quite prosperous. He had a number of siblings, but he was a difficult child, irascible, sulky, obstinate, choleric, prone to throwing tantrums and so forth. What were they to do with him? Bizarrely, they thought he might make a clergyman, so they went to a special college with a view to him taking holy orders. Anyway, that didn't pan out. I think the church was saved. It was a disgrace to the cloth. So then he went to West Point. That's the United States Military Academy, as in to train to be an army officer. But that was equally unsuitable for someone of his temperament. He just wouldn't bend to their will. He always to cheek those set in authority over him. And he got very low grades in almost everything he did. He was also myopic, suffered various infirmities. But maybe I'll just sort of hop up now. And that might get people who are irate in the garden at me peeking over this. But it is a lovely garden. Nobody says you can't actually do this. There we go. There's the garden. Anyway, so Whistler, he then he finally was kicked out after 3 years. It was Robert E. Lee who kicked him out. He was the director of West Point at that stage. Whistler's brother then became a surgeon, joined the Confederate Army in the Civil War. So Whistler then moved to Paris. He decided to establish himself as an artist. There are so many struggling and even starving artists, well, especially back then, and Paris really was the world centre of art. But he was very, very successful, mainly as a painter. And then he moved to London, and he was on the edge of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, some of whom lived down the street, like Dante Gabriel Rossetti. And he was blessed with a mordant wit. He was very humorous. He could have been a writer too, actually. And he had a friendly rivalry with Oscar Wilde, who lived only half a mile away, that away in Tite Street, a bit in from the river. So they regularly used to dine with each other. It was part of this aesthetic movement of the 1870s into the 1880s. Believing in art for the sake of art. He didn't want his art to be teaching people a lesson. He just wanted to produce something that was resplendent in itself. So he had no truck with ideology. I don't know a great deal about art, especially the visual art, so I can't tell you very much about it. Anyway, so he was married. I'm not sure he had children with his wife, but he had a number of mistresses. He was a notorious womanizer. That was his vice, and so having affairs with his models and his maidservants and so on. And so had a number of children with them. That was him, a carouser. And he died in 1903. He's buried in Chiswick. So Whistler's mother is his most famous painting. He took one of his mother's maiden names as part of his name. Anyway, you might have seen the film Bean from 1997, in which one American wants to buy Whistler's mother back from France, and Dr. Bean is involved with, not really Dr. Bean, Mr. Bean, played by Rowan Atkinson, so admirably, that satirical character. So that is Whistler, who was very wealthy, painted so many portraits of notable people like Carlyle, again, who lived in the area. This is Chelsea. His fabulous house indicates just how affluent he was. Brunel lived next door, although Brunel would have died shortly after Whistler came to London. Not sure they were neighbours, at the same time. And this is the River Thames. Look at all these houseboats here. The water level is very, very low because the Thames is tidal. Okay, seawater coming in from that away. Okay, that's the sea and that's inland. You can see how low it is. Okay, look at all these red flags. These tower blocks, fairly ugly at Chelsea World's End. That's enough about Whistler. I don't know a great deal about him, I'm afraid, but well, another point is he actually lived in St. Petersburg for several years as a child, when his father was hired by Tsar Nicholas I of Russia to start the railways there. And so he had some clash with John Ruskin, that celebrated artist. There was a libel trial. I can't remember who said what about whom. But anyway, it was pointed out that Whistler had lyingly claimed to have been born in St. Petersburg, which he hadn't. He'd born in rather more prosaic Lowell, Massachusetts, and grown up mostly in Connecticut. A few years in Russia, so spoke fairly good Russian. All right, that's enough about Whistler.